Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today I'll be making the first look from my Ankara series. Now, I recently announced on Instagram that I'm going to make 10 different looks for 10 occasions. Today is the day that I'm going to make the first one. Yay! So I actually decided that this first look would be for a Noambe, a wedding, because I think that's the most standard thing when you think about an Ankara. So like I want to ease into it, right? And I decided on making a mermaid dress. I actually have a drawing here. So I have a very rough sketch here that only I understand. I'm honestly not sure if it's focusing, but basically I have a sweetheart neckline. I actually have two different sleeves here because I'm undecided as to what to do. And also it's a mermaid dress, like I said earlier. So let's see how it goes. So I actually bought this Ankara for the dress, and now that I think about it, I feel like I've just set myself up really by going for this design, because the dress I want to make, you see, when I bought all the Ankara, I didn't really have any design in mind, right? And with the dress I want to make, I'm going to need far more length than what a regular Ankara gives here. So I have to like use it horizontally. But like once I use it horizontally, the design could potentially become asymmetrical, or I could end up having to waste a lot of fabric to make it symmetrical. But it's okay, we're going to make it work. I'll just get started on the skirt and see how it goes. For my front skirt, on a folded piece of fabric, I measured my waist circumference with seam allowance already added. Then I measured the length of my waist to my hip, and then I measured the circumference of my hip, and then I measured the distance between my waist to where the flare would start from. That's the 18.5 inches you can see right now. And on there, I measured the circumference of my legs at that point. It's basically the hip circumference minus 2 inches. So I'm just using a pattern master to draw out the curve right now, and I would go on to use a long ruler to flare out the skirt. Basically, you can just flare it out to occupy as much space as is available. As you can see here, I still had more space left, and so I widened the flare even a little bit more. At the center front, I dipped the waist by ½ an inch. I redrafted it back to the waistline at the side seam. I also softened the flare corner right here, and then I cut out this fabric. So this is just me making the flare look cuter at the corner of the side seam. And here is how it looks. For the back, I placed the same fabric that I just cut out onto another folded piece of fabric, and I folded in 2 centimeters at the center back to serve as zip allowance. I increased the length of the center back by 5 inches, and then I rounded it right back to the same length as the front at the side seam. This length I just added is going to give the flare a much more elegant silhouette, especially when the tail is added. Just cutting it out. At my center back, I increased the length by 1 inch and redrafted it back to the side seam. This move I just made was an incorrect one, so here's a clip of me removing the 1 inch back much later in my process. Hey guys, I just cut out the skirt. Now I want to move on to the tail, which is the part that would give it like fullness and that dragging behind me effect at the back. I'm going to try to make sure that I get a shot of my back, of me walking away from the camera. Also, the light is gone, and I'm just hoping that by the time I actually need it, which would be when it's time for me to sew, like it's not going to be a problem. But if at all it's not ready, I'm just going to like go ahead and run an errand that I absolutely need to run, and I'll see you guys later. To make my tail, I folded the fabric at a 45-degree angle because we need to cut this on the bias. Not like you couldn't do otherwise, but that's not going to give a lot of drape. So I drew a straight line, and let's call the straight line my anchor line. And this tip right here, where the head of the tape rule is, let's call it my anchor point. I went onto my center back, and then I measured the length of the fabric from where the flare ought to start from all the way to the end of the skirt. That was 38.5 inches. Now, from the anchor point on my anchor line, I measured 38.5 inches. Now I'm going to keep the tape rule at that anchor point. It's going to be constant, but then I'm going to be moving the rest of the tape rule across the fabric. But what I would do is to gradually increase the length that I was measuring. So I measured 38.5 inches first on the line, and next I would measure 39 inches, and then 40 inches, and then 40.5, and it went on and on like that until I had exhausted the fabric. I'm sorry that it's blurry here. I would cut out the tail on all of the lines that I drew. It looks like this. This is day 2, and I have to finish up today, unfailingly. I already made my buste pattern. I made a tutorial on this once in my corset top video, so check that out for how I went about it. Right now I'm going to cut my bodice, and then I'll be right back. So these are all my bodice pieces that I cut out, the Ankara and also the lining, to which I already fused interfacing. I would go on to stitch all of them together in the order that I put them on the screen. Done. And the lining is done as well. And I also sewed boning to the lining. Now I cut out those tiny pieces of fabric to serve as, I guess I could call them sleeves. And then I stitched them onto the bodice. So I'm done stitching the bodice, looking like this. I'm moving on to the skirt. Anyway, I'm moving on to the skirt. I'm going to sew the dart, and then I'll sew the skirt together, front and back as well. And then I'll be right back to sew the bodice. You know what? After making the skirt, I'll just like go ahead and just join the bodice to the skirt for both the lining and the actual Ankara. And then we'll be close to actually finishing this video. To figure out where to place the dart on the skirt, I measured the distance between these two functional front bodice lines, and I translated that distance by measuring half of it, of course, from the center front of the skirt. That would be the first leg of the dart, and 1 inch away from the line would be the second leg of the dart. I also found the middle point, and I decided on the length of the dart. Honestly, you can pick anything, like as long as it's not too short or something. I went on to stitching this dart on the lining and then on the Ankara, and also from here on out, everything I do on the Ankara, I also replicate on the lining, even though I may not necessarily talk about it. I moved on to actually sewing the skirt. First thing you want to do is to stitch the center back closed. I pinned one leg of the tail to one leg of the skirt, You guys and I like to pin a lot just so we know what we're doing. And as soon as I'm done stitching, I would just sew the other leg as well. The next thing for me to do was to stitch the front to the back of the skirt, and this I did by just using the 1/2 inch stitching allowance I had added to the skirt initially. So after that, I would sew on the bodice. Then I went on ahead to stitch the bodice to the skirt. Do whatever you have to do to make sure that the darts align. The darts should look like one straight line from the bodice all through to the skirt. So if you have to change the position of things, you do that. Do I leave this hanging? Maybe I should, because by the time I go in with the lining, this upper part is going to be more stabilized. So it's not like I actually need this to give it structure, you know. I'm inclined to keep it this way because it would just make hand movement easier, as opposed to when it's this tight and no. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it like this. All right, bye. The rest of the dress is nearly done already, but I don't want you guys to see yet. I inserted bra cups, after which I went on to connect my lining. Now you just place it on top of it, right sides facing, you pin them together and you sew. In sewing, make sure that you keep the sleeves away, push the sleeves between them inside as much as possible. That way when you're done, you would have like a situation where the sleeves are. Let's talk about the long loop of satin fabric that I used to add drama to the dress. It was long, and then I had a shoelace, and I put the shoelace inside the loop all the way through, and I sort of like framed it to my size. So I went ahead to pin the satin to the top of the dress. I made sure that the shoelace was at the dramatic part. I did not have a plan or a structure in mind. I did not know what I was going to do until I was doing it. I just had a dream. And, I winged it. Right after pinning to the top, I started to make this randomized, super anyhow moldings, for lack of a better word. I'll just hold a mass of fabric, move them around, pin them, and it was looking good. I did this throughout the entire thing. I tried it on, I liked it. I called my friend, she loved it. We both agreed it was a look. So I just kept on doing that really. And the next thing I did was to actually pick a needle and a thread, and I unstitched every point where there was a pin. Replacing the pins with hand stitching, and I didn't want to show too much of that. That was basically the end of the dress. Whenever I would replace it with stitching, I would just ruche the fabric around to hide the stitches. And if you're wondering what happened to the shoelace, I top stitched the opening short and I cut off the shoelace left, and I hid that mess under a mass of fabric.